paradrama tales. He said we'd grab food, that he'd call me a ride home, but when the car stopped, we were outside a bar near his place. It was just one more drink. I didn't argue. I just quietly left. Was that overreacting, or the only smart thing I could have done? It started like most things do these days. A message, a few jokes exchanged, and then a plan. He seemed normal enough, polite, funny in a charming but safe kind of way. Nothing about him raised any alarms. He picked the place. A nice little bar, tucked away on a quieter street. The kind with string lights out front and cozy booths that make you feel like maybe, just maybe, you're about to have a good night. I wasn't expecting fireworks. I wasn't even expecting a second date. I just wanted one evening, a chance to talk to someone new, share a drink, maybe laugh a little. I had work early the next morning. I told him that up front, and I had my dog waiting at home. Nothing major, just those little realities that remind you the night has its limits. He nodded when I told him, said, "No problem at all. Just a couple drinks. Easy night." He smiled as he said it, like he understood. And in the beginning, it really was okay. We talked. I asked questions. He answered. He asked me things too. Where I grew up, what I do for a living, what kind of music I like. The kind of small talk that's mostly harmless, though a little forgettable. But still, I appreciated the effort. After the first drink, I mentioned again that I couldn't stay out too late. He raised his glass, nodded again, and said something like, "Of course. Last one." I excused myself to the bathroom, figuring that'd be a good natural endpoint. I even rehearsed what I'd say on the way back. "It's getting late. Thanks for the company." Simple, kind, clear. But when I returned, something had shifted. There were 2 fresh drinks on the table. He looked up at me, a little too pleased with himself, and said, "Figured we had time for one more. I also called a car. Thought we could grab food first before I take you home." I blinked, smiled politely, but inside something tilted. I hadn't agreed to more drinks, I hadn't asked for food, and I certainly hadn't asked him to manage how or when I'd get home. Still, I didn't say anything. Not right away. Because in that moment, I didn't want to be rude. I didn't want to make a fuss. So I sat back down. But in the back of my mind, something very quietly whispered, "This is no longer my plan." Looking back, the signs were there. Not flashing red, not screaming danger, more like flickers. Soft, subtle signals that something wasn't quite right. But at the time, I chalked it up to awkwardness or excitement. After all, it was just drinks, right? The first flag came early in the night when I told him I had to be up at 6 a.m. for work. His response? A half laugh and, "Oh, that's brutal. You're a morning person, huh?" I smiled and nodded. Not by choice. But he didn't ask anything more about it. No offer to make sure I got home on time. Just a pivot back to his own story. Something about his last job, I think. I let it slide. Then later I mentioned my dog. Not in a bragging way, just in the natural way that someone talks about the little soul waiting for them at home. I said, "I hate leaving him alone too long. He gets anxious." He gave a nod, barely breaking eye contact with his drink, and replied, "That's why I like cats. Way less needy." It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't curious either. And that's what I keep circling back to. He wasn't curious about me. Not really. He asked the kind of questions people ask when they're filling space, not when they want to know who's sitting across from them. He smiled in the right moments, but he didn't respond when I shared something vulnerable. It was all smooth on the surface, but hollow just underneath. I didn't recognize it for what it was, though, because he wasn't rude. He wasn't aggressive. He didn't say anything overtly inappropriate. But that's the thing about red flags. They're rarely loud at first. Sometimes they're just the absence of real listening. The way someone keeps pushing the night forward even after you've said, "I should head home." When I returned from the bathroom and saw those 2 new drinks waiting, I paused, just for a second. He beamed like he'd done something thoughtful, like he was rewarding both of us with just a little more fun. But what he didn't realize, or maybe didn't care about, was that he had stopped hearing me. My tiredness, my responsibilities, my words, all of it apparently optional. It wasn't malice, it was entitlement wrapped in charm, and I still hadn't figured out how to leave. Not yet. I didn't want to make a scene. That's what kept echoing in my mind as I stood there in front of the bar, watching him wave down a rideshare like this was all perfectly normal. He turned to me and said with a smile, "Come on, let's grab a bite. There's a great little spot just a few minutes away." I hesitated, then stepped into the car. I don't know why I did. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was politeness drilled too deeply into my bones. Or maybe it was that quiet instinct that whispers, just go along until you figure out a way out. I sat stiffly in the back seat, folded hands in my lap. He chatted easily with the driver, dropping casual comments about how long it had been since he'd been back in town. He didn't look at me. He didn't notice I wasn't laughing anymore. At one point, I glanced at the map on the screen. We weren't heading toward the food district. We were veering in a different direction, toward the residential side of the city. I felt it before I saw it. That gut-deep shift from discomfort to alertness. The kind that doesn't scream, but simmers. The kind you learn to trust over time. "Hey," I asked lightly, "where are we going?" "Oh," he said, brushing it off. "There's a bar near my place that does late-night snacks. Super chill vibe, it'll be quick, I promise." Quick. He always had a way of making everything sound casual. But nothing about this felt casual anymore. I nodded, said nothing. But I made a quiet decision. I started watching the landmarks, counting blocks, holding on to that internal map like it was armor. We pulled up in front of a dimly lit bar that sat just around the corner from a cluster of apartment buildings. He jumped out, turned back toward me, and grinned. "It's just here." I smiled. I unbuckled my seatbelt, and I reached for the one tool I still had, my voice. "Mind if I run to the bathroom first?" "Sure, just inside, on the left." But I didn't go inside. I walked right past the door, around the corner, and into the night. I didn't run. I walked, slowly, intentionally. I didn't want to look panicked, even though my heart was hammering like a warning bell inside my chest. My phone was already in my hand. I hadn't opened the rideshare app yet, but just holding it made me feel slightly less vulnerable, slightly more in control. I turned the first corner, then another. I didn't even know exactly where I was, just that I needed distance. From him, from that bar, from the growing sense that I was no longer a participant in this night, but a piece being moved around someone else's board. That wasn't my exit. He said he was taking me to grab food. He said it would be quick. He said he would send me home. But somewhere along the way, he started deciding for me. He had dismissed every gentle out I'd offered. When I said I was tired, when I said I had to work, when I mentioned my dog, each one was waved off, ignored, replaced with another plan I hadn't agreed to. I thought of that moment in the car, the one where I asked where we were going, and he gave me that breezy, confident response. "Just a bar near my place." That phrase echoed in my head as I walked. Near my place, not near my home, not toward the direction of safety or rest, or the quiet comfort I'd asked for at the start of the night. This entire evening had become a detour toward his comfort, and maybe nothing would have happened. Maybe it really was just a bar. Maybe he would have gotten me food, had a drink, called a car, and waved goodbye at the curb like a gentleman. But maybe wasn't good enough. I didn't like the feeling of someone brushing aside my choices and calling it charm. I didn't like being steered without being asked. I didn't like how quickly this date stopped feeling mutual and started feeling managed. I paused under a streetlight and finally opened the app. The little blue dot blinked beside my name, pulsing like a heartbeat. I ordered a ride, back to my own place, back to the things that belonged to me, my bed, my space, my safety. While I waited, I looked down at the screen and noticed 2 messages from him. Both said some version of, "Hey, everything okay?" Followed by, "You coming back?" I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to ghost him, but because there was nothing to say that he hadn't already ignored. That wasn't my exit. He knew I had one. I'd told him all night. He just didn't listen. And when someone can't hear your voice while you're sitting right in front of them, you learn to walk away quietly, on your own terms, before the night decides for you. I didn't plan the exit ahead of time, but when the bar came into view, dim neon, pulsing music behind fogged windows, my instincts whispered what my voice hadn't yet dared to say out loud. You don't owe him the rest of this night. I smiled, just enough. Mind if I use the restroom first? He didn't hesitate. Yeah, sure. Inside, past the bar, take a left. His tone was casual, easy. He thought we were still on the same page. But I wasn't walking toward the bathroom. I was walking toward the door. I stepped past the patio, past the groups clustered outside with drinks and cigarettes and laughter that didn't include me. I turned the corner and didn't look back. My heart was pounding, but my steps were steady. I didn't want to run. I didn't want to panic. I just wanted to be gone, before the moment soured, before my kindness turned into complicity. And that's the part that still gets to me. The part where I had to act like everything was fine, just to leave. I had to smile. I had to sound soft. I had to thank him for being a good date, even while planning how to get away without setting off alarm bells. It wasn't fear of violence exactly. He hadn't threatened me. He hadn't raised his voice. But there's a kind of emotional pressure that's harder to name. The one where you're so deeply aware of how men can flip, how fast a nice guy becomes something else if they feel embarrassed or rejected. So I played along. I made it to the sidewalk, turned the corner, and ducked into a side street. Only then did I allow myself to exhale. I pulled out my phone and called a rideshare. Not even a text to him, just a quiet retreat from a night that was no longer mine. The little car icon on my screen never looked so reassuring. Watching it approach felt like watching the edge of something I almost didn't avoid. And as I stood there, the weight of it began to settle in. He hadn't hit me. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't done anything that would make the news. But he overrode my voice. He disregarded my words. He spun the night into something that served him, not me. And when I excused myself to the restroom, I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't being cold. I was reclaiming control. With the gentlest, quietest move, I had left. He may never understand why I left. He may tell his friends I was flaky or rude or confusing, but I know what I felt. And that moment, standing outside, under dim orange streetlights, watching my ride arrive, was the first time all night I truly felt safe. Sometimes, walking away without explanation is the most powerful thing you can do. When I got home that night, the silence was both a relief and a weight. My dog greeted me at the door like I'd been gone for days. I knelt down, ran my hands through his fur, and exhaled for what felt like the first time all evening. No music, no lights, just me and the question that had already started to settle in the back of my mind. Was I being dramatic? I replayed it all. The drinks, the second bar, the car ride, the moment I excused myself. It didn't look like a big deal on paper. He didn't yell. He didn't grab me. He didn't do anything people usually call bad. But that's what made it harder. Because when harm isn't loud, we're taught to minimize it, and I could already hear the imaginary voices chiming in. He probably just really liked you. You could have said no more clearly. You left without saying goodbye. Maybe that was the rude part. The thing is, I did say no, more than once. I said I was tired. I said I had work. I said I needed to get back to my dog. And somehow, none of that counted. That's what made me feel crazy. Like I was stuck between two realities. The one where nothing technically went wrong, and the one where my feelings were screaming, "You weren't safe." So I started justifying my decision, as if I needed permission to protect myself. I didn't make a scene. I wasn't accusatory. I left calmly. Still, I doubted myself, because he probably went home and told someone, "I don't get it. Everything was going fine." And maybe to him, it was. But fine to him meant ignoring me. Fine to him meant controlling the plan. Fine to him meant watching me shrink and still thinking he was charming. I sat on my couch that night in sweatpants and wiped my makeup off with a towel I didn't even bother to wet. And the only thought I kept circling was, why do we question ourselves for leaving when we felt unheard? I didn't owe him the rest of my night. I didn't owe him a confrontation. And I certainly didn't owe him comfort while I was being quietly unsettled. But that voice, that maybe it wasn't that bad voice, it doesn't go away easily. Especially for women. Especially when we've been trained to prioritize someone else's comfort over our own safety. To be nice before we're honest. To soften the truth so it doesn't bruise anyone else's ego. So yeah, I asked myself, was I being dramatic? And the answer finally came in a whisper. No, I was being careful. Number, I was being clear. Number, I was being brave. Because leaving isn't drama. It's self-respect. The more I sat with what happened that night, the more I realized it wasn't just about him not listening. It was about what he thought he was hearing. When I said, I'm tired, he didn't hear, I'm done for the night. He heard, you just need to show me a better offer. When I said, I have to work early, he didn't hear, I need to leave soon. He heard, convince me to stay. And when I said, I should get home to my dog, he didn't hear the boundary. He heard an obstacle to negotiate, because somewhere along the way, a lot of men were taught, not always directly but clearly enough, that no isn't always final. It's just the start of the chase. They've been conditioned to believe that persistence is romantic, that if you push just a little harder, suggest a little more, smile the right way, she'll say yes. That a woman's hesitation is an invitation, not a decision. And that's how things like this happen. Not in some back alley, not in a moment of screaming or violence, but in the quiet override of someone's comfort, someone's words, someone's time. He probably thought he was being generous, ordering drinks, arranging a car, suggesting food, but all of it was for his version of the night, not mine. And when I didn't go along with the plan, when I said I wanted to head home, when I used the bathroom to slip away quietly, he didn't get angry, at least not on the surface, but he didn't get it either. Because for him, no never meant the conversation was over. It just meant he had more convincing to do. And that's the problem. Too many people have been socialized to hear women's boundaries as flexible, as something to gently push, as a soft maybe they can still turn around. But here's the truth. No is not a negotiation. It's not a test. It's not a flirt. It's not the opening act before the real fun begins. It's a full sentence. And it should be treated with the same respect as a yes. Because when someone tells you what they need and you dismiss it, you're not being persuasive. You're being selfish. You're not being romantic. You're being manipulative. And no, that doesn't mean you're a monster. It doesn't mean you had evil intentions, but it does mean you saw your wants as more important than their words. That's what happened that night. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't trap me physically. He didn't do anything extreme. But he kept rewriting the night I said I wanted. He kept ignoring the exits I pointed to. He kept hearing, convince me, when I was clearly saying, no, thank you. And that's the kind of boundary crossing that's harder to call out. Because it wears a polite face. But polite doesn't mean harmless. And persistence, when it ignores someone's voice, isn't charming. It's control. Served with a smile. The next day, I talked to a friend about what happened. She didn't ask, why didn't you say something? She didn't say, maybe you misunderstood him. She just said, yeah, I've done that before too. And just like that, I realized I wasn't alone, not even close. There are so many of us who've excused ourselves to the restroom and never come back. So many of us who've smiled while making a mental exit plan. So many of us who've left quietly. Not because it wasn't serious, but because it almost was. And because we're taught over and over again that the safest way out is the softest one. We learn to stay calm when our instincts scream, to be polite when our time is being taken, to laugh when something feels off, just to make sure we're not overreacting. And that's the truth that doesn't always make the headlines. Most women don't yell when they feel unsafe. They disappear. We slip away between drinks. We pretend we got a call. We fake headaches. We lie about early meetings. We move our bodies out of rooms our voices weren't enough to leave. Not because we're weak, but because we've learned that sometimes silence keeps us safest. And yet, later, we question ourselves. We wonder if we made it up, if we judged too harshly, if we should have given him a chance. But every time I've trusted my gut, I've been right. And every time I ignored it, I paid the price. That night, I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't argue with him or try to explain why his plan felt wrong. I just excused myself and walked out the door. It wasn't a dramatic exit, but it was a decision, one that women all over the world make every day. We don't leave to hurt someone. We leave to protect ourselves, because we know, far too well, what happens when we stay too long, when we ignore that first flicker of discomfort, when we give just one more hour, one more drink, one more try. The world doesn't always believe women until something bad happens, but by then, the damage is done. That's why we learn to leave before it's obvious, to escape in the quiet, to carry our doubt home and unpack it in private. And I hate that this is so common. I hate that so many of us have stories that start with, "It was going fine until..." But I'm also grateful, because I know now I'm not the only one who's trusted her instincts and left. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to just get up and walk away. No speech, no apology, no drama. Just enough love for yourself to say, "Not this time." I used to think that unless someone raised their voice or slammed a door, it didn't count. That unless something dramatic happened, a clear line crossed, a rule broken, then I didn't have the right to feel unsettled, or disappointed, or hurt. But that night taught me something I wish I had learned much earlier. Your discomfort is reason enough. You don't need proof. You don't need permission. You don't need to explain why your gut said, "Leave." When someone stops listening to your words, when they make choices on your behalf, no matter how charmingly, they're telling you who matters more in that moment. And if it isn't you, then you're allowed to choose yourself. Because trusting your instincts is not paranoia, it's not drama, and it is not an overreaction. It's protection, it's wisdom, it's strength built from the experiences that women have passed down for generations, not always in loud voices, but in glances, in stories, in exits made without fanfare. If you've ever left a date early and wondered if you were too harsh, if you've ever texted a friend just to feel safer on the walk home, if you've ever smiled your way through discomfort because speaking up felt dangerous, then I want you to know you did the right thing. You don't owe anyone more of your time when they've already shown they don't value your voice. And you never need to apologize for putting your safety, your peace, your truth first. So if you're watching this and something inside you is nodding, quietly, painfully, knowingly, leave a comment below that simply says, "I trusted my gut." Let it be a signal, a thread between women, a way of saying, "I saw it, I felt it, I walked away, and I'm proud I did."